Hey everyone, this is Nitro. So in this video, I wanted to talk about the way to build everyone's favorite bald general, Vargas. So Vargas is the other primary tank in this game for PvE content. The other one being Ledin, of course. And unless you started much later than release, you're going to choose either Vargas or Ledin as your primary tank. So, in this video, I'm going to talk about the way to build Vargas. In large part because I know a lot of the Southeast Asian server players have been wondering about that since I never created a video on how to build Vargas. So, with that said, let's begin. And the very first thing to talk about with Vargas is the characters that are required to unlock his 4th and 5th bond. Now, Vargas is an interesting character in that he actually doesn't truly need his 5th bond. He only needs his 4th bond. The reason for that is because Vargas is one of the characters who replaces his attack value with 1.6 times his defense value. Meaning as long as you pump up his defense value, you never need to upgrade his attack. Thus, you only need to max out his first 4 bonds to truly use Vargas. So, which character unlocks his critical 4th bond, which is the toughness bond? Well, that character is actually Imelda. Just like how Vargas unlocks his Imelda's bond, Imelda unlocks Vargas's bond. So as long as you have Imelda, the SR character, you're good to go to use Vargas. I should note that if you're using Vargas, you should max out these first 4 bonds and also max out the heart bond once you have access to it. Because the heart bond increases hit points, defense, and magic defense values, right? So that will further increase his survivability as well as the amount of damage he will do and the tankiness of Vargas as a character in general. Okay, so with his bond covered, let's now talk about Vargas's talent, Superhuman Bravery. And the way this talent works is physical damage reduction increases when the unit has higher hit points. So by higher hit points, they mean the unit's hit point percentage, not the actual hit point value. Okay? It reduces damage by up to a certain percentage. And after receiving a fatal blow, the hero will revive with a certain amount of hit points. This effect can be triggered 1 time during each battle. So, the percentages are as follows. For the damage reduction, at 2 stars it's 15%, 3 stars is 18%, 4 stars is 20%, 5 stars is 26%, which is what you currently see on my Vargas, and at 6 stars it becomes a maximum of 30% damage reduction for physical damage. As for the revival hit point percentage, it's 15% at 2 stars, 18% at 3 stars, 21% at 4 stars, 25% at 5 stars, and then 30% at 6 stars. So this talent is in very many ways one of the defining aspects of Vargas. The physical damage reduction means he is incredibly tough against melee attacks in general, although he is vulnerable to both infantry and to magic attacks. However, the revival effect, allowing him to revive once when he dies, is incredibly useful, right? Do note that this revival effect is part of his talent, so it cannot be disabled. Landius can also revive. However, Landius' revival is a skill. It's considered a passive, which means, for example, if you're facing Elwyn and Elwyn uses frontal assault, it can disable that passive of reviving. However, Vargas, since it's actually his talent, you cannot disable it. No matter what, you have to kill Vargas twice. So that's one big advantage of using Vargas. However, there is one big disadvantage to using Vargas, however. And that disadvantage is the fact that Vargas is really one of the very few tanks who does not have a faction buff. Right? No, there is no faction buff in any of his skills. Pretty much all the other tanks you use, whether it's Freya, whether it's Ledin, whether it's Landius, right? They all carry their own faction buff. Vargas is one who doesn't have it, so you have to bring someone else to faction buff him, which is usually most commonly Ultimuller, but it can also be Bernhard. Right? Because he is part of the Strategic Masters and Empire faction. There are other faction buffers, right? For example, Lance is a faction buffer, Leon is a faction buffer, and Lanford is a faction buffer. But those three are much more rarely used as faction buffers. I mean, no one really brings Lance, first of all. If you're going to bring a flyer, you'll definitely bring Ultimuller instead. Leon should never bring a faction buff in general. And Lanford can bring a faction buff if you have a Lanford built up. I've yet to truly see someone who's built up Lanford, but he is usable too as a faction buffer. More frequently though, as I said, it's Ultimuller or Bernhard. So, with his talent talked about, let's talk about Vargas' best class. And Vargas, as a tank, should really be in the Lancer class, because there's a lot of maps where you're facing cavalry, right? His second class is an infantry class. An infantry class as a tank is just a terrible idea in general. So Royal Vanguard is definitely his best class, right? With that said, Vargas really should get double class mastery, if not access to every single class, okay? Because he really does need those skills. You know, initially you're definitely gonna go High Lord, Vanguard, and Royal Vanguard so that he can tank, but you'll definitely want to unlock Gladiator and Brave, and General is optional, but it's nice to have. Okay. So, with that said, let's talk about his skill combos, right? With single class mastery, that is only access to Royal Vanguard, you will build Vargas pretty much the way I have him built right now. Unbreakable Guardian is his main guard skill. You'll probably bring Heavy Shield for the chance to reduce melee damage taken by 50%. And for the last skill, the 1-point skill, you'll choose either Protect, because Protect decreases physical damage taken by 5%, or you'll choose Attack Support. And the reason to bring Attack Support is if you want like a character standing right next to Vargas to get plus 15% attack and immunity to attack and int reduction, and effects that silence active skills. So you'll choose one or the other. So with all that mentioned, this is the Vargas in single class mastery, and you'll have a turn where Unbreakable Guardian is down, where Vargas will not do much damage and will only have a guard range of 1. With double class mastery though, Vargas then becomes useful both offensively and defensively, because from the double class mastery, he gets access to first Attack Intimidate, reducing the attack and int of all enemies within 2 surrounding blocks by 15%, and more importantly, he gets Power Stab and Battle Cry. Okay, Power Stab allows him to deal 1.5 times damage and replaces his attack value with 1.6 times his defense value. So it has the same effect as Unbreakable Guardian in replacing attack with 1.6 times defense. Battle Cry, on the other hand, is that before attacking, it'll dispel 1 buff from the enemy and decreases the enemy's attack and defense by 10%, lasts 1 turn. So from Gladiator skill, in my opinion, isn't very useful, but Battle Cry is definitely useful as a Power Stab. So once you have the double class mastery, what you frequently end up running on Vargas is then Unbreakable Guardian for the first 2-point skill, Power Stab for the second 2-point skill, and for the 1-point skill, very frequently Battle Cry, because you can dispel a buff from the enemy whenever you attack, and decrease their attack and defense values, applying a few debuffs too. With this double class mastery, Vargas can dispel 1 buff from the Thunder Dragon, and then Bernhard can dispel the other buff from the Thunder Dragon via his Hegemony skill, allowing you to easily clear the Thunder Dragon, even level 65 Thunder Dragon, right? In that battle, you generally use an offensive Vargas with Power Stab and Battle Cry, and it's just, yeah, you can, in fact, with these two, the Thunder Dragon, even the level 65 and 70 versions, become very auto-battle friendly. You can just have these two carry on, attack the Thunder Dragon until it dies. As an aside, I've also seen people actually choose to bring Armor Pierce over Unbreakable Guardian in these auto battle fights against the Thunder Dragon, because Unbreakable Guardian is a turn where you're not actually doing any kind of damage to the enemy. But if you bring Power Stab, you can be attacking with Power Stab, then Armor Pierce, right? And then you'll have one downtime turn more or less where you're doing a regular attack with minimal damage, but it's more of a consistent cycle with more damage overall. So that Armor Pierce from his General's line class is a nice to have, but it's not truly required. Alright, so we've talked about his two most common skill combos, where he has single class mastery and double class mastery. So let's talk about his soldiers now. So, soldiers. From the training ground, Vargas gets access to two soldiers. One is infantry and one is lancer. The infantry one is the Cyclops, which, as long as he's attacking enemies with lower hit points, then once again, this lower hit points means lower hit point percentage. After entering battle, your attack and defense is increased by a certain percentage based on your Cyclops training level, right? So it's kind of like, it's an infantry character whose stats increase if the enemy has been weakened. The Lava Titan, on the other hand, is a Lancer soldier that can burn the enemy, causing them to lose a certain percentage of hit points after they take an action. In addition to these two tier 3 soldiers, he also has really two other primary tier 3 soldiers. The Lancer one would be Stone Colossus, where if the soldier hit points is below 70%, damage taken is decreased by a certain percentage. And the other one is the Orc Berserker, where as long as the soldier hit points is above 80%, attack is increased by a certain percentage. Last but not least, he also has Guardian Infantry, where when attacked, and your soldier hit points is above 80%, defense increases by a certain percentage. Overall, of these soldiers, I would say the only truly, my opinion, of the more useful ones would be Lava Titan and Orc Berserker. Right? Cyclops, I personally don't particularly like because it's very, very situational. You have to damage the enemy, weaken them, before this effect kicks in. Whereas, by comparison, Orc Berserker, as long as the Orc Berserkers are healthy, your damage is increased. So that's why I personally prefer Orc Berserkers over Cyclops if I were to use an infantry soldier. But Lava Titan is definitely better than Stone Colossus. So the two soldiers he would end up using generally is Lava Titan and Orc Berserker, depending on the situation and the map. Alright, so with the soldiers covered, let's move into the equipment section. And the equipment section, you can see, which is pretty much what you end up using on Vargas. Okay, you get a free Aeneas armor as you level up, and that's the armor you'll give him. Right? You'll get a free Aeneas helmet, and that's the helmet you'll give him as well, which increases hit points and defense. And you get a free King's Amulet, which increases defense value, hit points, and defense. So those three are pretty much near best in slot items for Vargas early on, right? Other than that, there is a Yggdrasil branch for him, which is his best weapon, because the Yggdrasil branch increases defense, which with Unbreakable Guardian and the Power Stab increases its attack value, and it also allows him to ignore the enemy's defense, allowing him to do more damage to the enemy. Before you get access to these items, so if we're talking about SR items, you will likely be using, let me just bring it up, just any SRs that increase defense that he can equip, right? So for weapon, there is a lance that increases defense value. I'm just trying to find it right now. It's been a while since I looked at the SRs, so it might take me a little bit to find that. Aha, here it is, the Blood Lance, increasing defense by a certain percentage. Armor. Well, for him, temporarily, you would probably choose to use the Holy Steel armor, because when attacked, defense increases by 15%. At this time, when you're using SR gear rather than SSR gear, you probably won't have double class mastery, meaning he just has Unbreakable Guardian, so you're going to rely, so he's a pure tank at that point. Since he's never going to attack, the armor to use would be the Holy Steel armor. Of course, you can always choose to level up a Mithril armor, which increases defense by 10% rather than 15%, because, you might transition this Mithril armor to another character. So, after armor is helmets. And helmet-wise, you're definitely going to be using a chain helmet because that increases defense by 10%. And last but not least would be the accessory before you get the King's Amulet. And what you're looking for helmet would be something that increases defense and hit points, preferably. And I think that's the amulet. Hit points, defense, and it decreases melee damage taken by a certain percentage. So that would be his temporary accessory until you get the free King's Amulet. Alright, so at this point, let's talk about his absolute best in slot gear. Which means his gear after you've, let's say he's been using the equipment I have shown on Vargas for a while, right? Level 50 Yggdrasil Branch, and Ace Armor, and Ace's Helmet, and King's Amulet, and you want to change it up a bit. Well, if you're going to change it up a bit, there's the main things you would change on Vargas is the following. It is really just the accessory. You may choose to give your Vargas Divine Boots. Hit point increase, defense increase, and +1 mobility, increasing your Vargas' mobility to 4. That can be quite useful for Vargas because, generally speaking, your ability to clear maps in time is linked to the mobility of your tank. So your tank having +1 mobility can be incredibly useful. Another potentially useful item is actually Spirit Boots, right? Allowing Vargas to attack and retreat a little. The Spirit Boots, in fact, is his best in slot gear for Ancient Call when he's used. So giving him the Spirit Boots early is not a bad thing because it can work to your advantage later on. Other than that, he can definitely use Swordsmith Metal for PvP because, as always, it gives the immunity to fixed damage and effects that silence active skills, right? Increasing defense value. So Bracer Emblem allows your Vargas to definitely constantly use his skills, right? Because he can't be silenced. So he'll be able to Unbreakable Guardian and Power Stab at will. Alright, so with all his gear covered, let's now talk about the enchants and the enchant values you're looking for. Well, for Vargas, early on, I would say you probably want to use Hard Rock, and you'll do a full set of Hard Rock, because early on, survivability can be an issue, right? So having that 50% chance to restore 15% health after battle can be very useful, right? Other than Hard Rock though, you may choose to use two sets of 2 blue enchants, right? Because the 2-piece enchant value effect is defense and magic defense increases by 5%. So using, let's say, 2 Hard Rocks and 2 Ice enchants, you can get 10% defense, 10% magic defense increase. So that's another enchant that can work quite well on Vargas. Other enchants that can work on Vargas include Thorns, right? Thorns, because Vargas very frequently takes a lot of damage, especially from magic attacks and so on. So Thorns, when it kicks in, for the 30% chance to reflect damage taken by 50%, can help you counter the enemies. Thorns is more of a PvP enchant than a PvE enchant. Just be aware of that. Ice. Ice will, when attacked, you have a 20% chance to render the attacker unable to attack for 1 turn after battle. Ice is kind of like Thorns, to be honest. You're going to use this enchant more for PvP than PvE purposes. And it's a very optional one. And the final enchant that can work for Vargas is Steel. Steel enchant increases hit points by 10%, and damage taken is decreased by 10%. So this enchant basically is just a damage reduction and survivability enchant. In general, I actually prefer the 2+2 blue enchant. That's my personal opinion, because of the 10% defense and magic defense increase, leading to, you know, more attack value. So, but all of these enchants are perfectly viable on Vargas. You know, you can kind of pick which one you would prefer. So, with the other thing about the 2+2 enchant is that it combos very well with the hard rock early on, because you do hard rock enchant early on. Let's say you get some good enchants into your gear, right? Then you can transition that into two pieces of hard rock and then 2 pieces of ice or 2 pieces of crystal, right? For the 2+2 enchant setup. So that's just the smooth transitional method. At least that's how I see it. Alright, so with all that covered, let's talk about the final part of Vargas, which is the enchant values that you want. And it's quite simple. Because of Vargas relying on Unbreakable Guardian and Power Stab, where his attack value is replaced by 1.6 times his defense value, every single enchant value you want plus defense percentage, and ideally plus hit point percentage as well. That's all you need. So you'll want, 5% defense here and 10% hit points with probably a plus defense or plus hit point value stat on the weapon. For the armor, you want plus 15% defense, plus 15% hit points, and then plus defense, ideally. For the helmet, same thing, plus 15% defense, plus 15% hit points, and plus defense value. As for the amulet, plus 10% defense, plus 10% hit points, and then plus defense value if possible. So those would be the complete ideal enchants for Vargas. If you can get it, amazing. If you can't, well, you know what? Rolling those kind of enchants is incredibly rare, let's be honest, right? Because if you look at even my Ledin, right, the absolute best enchant I have on him is 10% defense and 11% hit points. Yeah. Whereas the Anasis helmet just has a mere plus 14% defense, no hit point increase at all. But those would be the enchants you get for Vargas. Ideally, and generally speaking, I would say aim for defense over hit points. If you can get plus 15% defense, plus 15% defense, plus 10% defense, and plus 5% defense, you'll be happy. Yeah. Although you'll want a bit of hit point increase at least, for more survivability against magic attacks in general. Alright, so that's pretty much the ideal setup for Vargas. There's no need for Vargas to move away from the Anasis armor or the Anasis helmet in general because of his role as a tank, If you really do want to... Now, if you were to change Vargas to a PvP setup, you may change up a few things. And the few pieces of equipment you may change in a PvP setup would be the following. First, rather than the Yggdrasil branch, you may choose to replace that with the weapon that gives you 2 range, which is just wow. Actually can't see it for some reason. Clothesline pole or feather duster, right? It reduces your damage dealt by 10%, but the hero's normal attack range is increased by 1, because equipping this for PvP allows Vargas to do a counterattack against ranged enemies, right? At 2 range. So that's why some people may choose to replace the Yggdrasil branch with a clothesline pole or feather duster for PvP. Other than that, the other change that some people do for PvP is to replace his armor, right? Anasis armor is great for PvE content, right? Giving the 10% defense as well as increased healing, 10% more healing. However, for PvP, Vargas' vulnerability to magic attacks, especially single target strikes, really comes out. So some people choose to replace Anasis armor with Aeolus' battle armor. Aeolus' battle armor is that when under ranged attack, has a 30% chance to lower damage taken by your unit this battle by 30%. So this can prevent Vargas from getting one-shotted, which is why some people choose to replace the Anasis armor with this, Aeolus battle armor. Of course, with that said, a lot of characters want Aeolus's battle armor for PvP, so it may be hard to find a spare one to give Vargas. In terms of helmets, I would say the helmet remains the same. Aeneas's helmet, giving him that 10% hit points and 5% defense, is the best survivability one out of the bunch, right? Gaia's armor, while it increases magic defense by 15%, Vargas's magic defense is very low to start, so the 15% increase doesn't particularly help. And the other helmets for, Lancer class soldiers, well, Reaper's Breath isn't that good for him, and neither is Chief's helmet, because he's not the one that needs to give someone else, right, prevention from being healed when he's the tank. If anything, it should be someone else having Chief's helmet to make him so that he cannot be prevented from healing. And last but not least would be the accessory change away from King's Amulet, because King's Amulet is very much a PvE accessory, right? If you were to not use King's Amulet, which increases defense and magic defense value as long as there's other characters nearby, some good items for Vargas are the following. First would be Divine Boots, and Divine Boots is great even for PvE as a side note, because it gives +1 mobility, as well as increasing hit points, defense, and defense boosts in terms of percentage. Having a 4 movement Vargas in PvP is quite useful, right? An offensive tank who can move far. So that's why Divine Boots is a great item for him. Swordsmith Metal, because of the immunity to fixed damage and effects that silence active skills, is also great for Vargas. It does increase defense value and all stats by +5%. So Swordsmith Metal is arguably one of the better items for him as well, if not the best one. And the other accessory that can replace King's Amulet is Spirit Boots. Because Spirit Boots, once again, hit points, defense, and plus defense percentage, and it allows Vargas to move 2 blocks after attacking the target, so he can kind of attack and retreat. This particular perk, the attack and retreat perk, is not that great for Vargas in PvP, but in fact, this Spirit Boots is actually his best accessory for Ancient Call, specifically against Hugin and Munin. So you may choose, if you get a Spirit Boots, you may choose to give it to Vargas and set it up early on so that he can use it for both PvP and PvE in the future. Alright, so that's everything I wanted to say about the way to build Vargas. In terms of building him up, he's quite straightforward, right? Because early on you use SR gear, then you transition into 3 items that you get, which is Aeneas's armor, Aeneas's helmet, and King's Amulet. When you eventually get a Yggdrasil branch, that's when you'll replace that Bloodlance, the SR Bloodlance that he has. And then finally, you might consider changing up his gear to a PvP format gear, but that's entirely optional and up to you. Alright, so once again, thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful, and on that note, Nitro out.